August 11, 1999. In a city where tornadoes were believed impossible, thousands poured into Salt Lake City's downtown, unaware that a monstrous storm was forming overhead. Utah averaged only 2 tornadoes a year statewide, and meteorologists insisted Salt Lake City was protected. So when the sky suddenly turned dark at lunch hour, it marked the start of a disaster no one saw coming. What tore through the heart of a mountain city and forever changed everything we thought we knew about tornadoes? Downtown Salt Lake City moved with its usual rhythm. Office workers filled the sidewalks, lunch crowds packed restaurants, and construction cranes towered over new buildings. On a typical August Wednesday, nearly 50,000 people filled the city center, with a confidence in the safety that mountains and dry air supposedly provided. Tornadoes belonged to the flat plains far away, at least that is what everyone believed. Utah's record seemed to back up the myth. From 1950 through the end of the century, only 121 tornadoes had ever been reported statewide. Most years saw just 2, and serious ones were so rare that an F2 or stronger tornado struck only once every 7 years somewhere in Utah. The last time a tornado killed anyone here was 1884, more than a century earlier. Local news, school textbooks, and even weather experts repeated the same story. The Wasatch and Oquirrh Mountains were said to shield Salt Lake from the kind of storms that batter the Midwest. The city's high elevation, dry climate, and valley walls were supposed to break up any threat before it could form. As midday approached, the city buzzed with activity. Vendors set up massive tents for the outdoor retailers convention. Couples gathered on Temple Square for weddings. The Utah Jazz's Delta Center prepared for afternoon events. Construction crews worked steadily on the new LDS Conference Center. No one paid much attention to the sky. The idea of a tornado here seemed impossible, as distant as a hurricane. But as the lunch hour wore on, something subtle began to change overhead. Shadows stretched across downtown as the noon hour approached. The air felt oddly still, and yet the sky kept growing darker, taking on a strange greenish tint that unsettled a few careful observers. Most people barely noticed. Vendors at the outdoor retailers convention glanced up as they raised their tents, trading uneasy jokes about the sudden gloom. On Temple Square, wedding guests shielded their eyes, squinting at clouds that seemed to pile higher by the minute. Construction workers on the conference center paused, watching the light fade as if a storm might break, but the wind stayed calm. No weather alerts sounded. Meteorologists saw nothing alarming on radar. The city's normal rhythms continued, lunches ordered, meetings scheduled, deliveries made. Yet in the South Valley, something unusual happened. At 12:41 p.m., hailstones 1.5 inches across pummeled Harriman, bouncing off cars and rooftops. It was the first real sign that the atmosphere above Salt Lake was anything but ordinary. Overhead, air masses collided in silence. Warm breezes from the south met cooler air drifting in from the Great Salt Lake. Invisible boundaries formed across the valley, creating a hidden zone of instability. Cloud tops soared to 41,000 feet, but on the ground, the only hints were the deepening shadows and the stray gusts that rattled street signs. No one suspected that, just moments away, the city's sense of safety was about to vanish. At 12:41 p.m., a narrow funnel touched down in the Poplar Grove neighborhood just west of downtown. The tornado's base measured only about 60 feet wide at first, barely more than the width of a city bus. It began its path on 300 South near 1340 West, carving a line through quiet residential blocks. Within seconds, debris lifted from backyards and rooftops, swirling into the darkening sky. The funnel moved northeast, gaining strength as it crossed Interstate 15. Drivers slammed on their brakes, watching as the black column spun across lanes, flinging dust and fragments high above the overpasses. As the tornado approached the city center, it widened and intensified. By 12:45 p.m., Wind speeds had reached F2 strength with winds over 110 miles per hour. The Delta Center, home of the Utah Jazz, stood directly in its path. Arena staff scrambled for cover as windows exploded across the building. Entire sections of roof peeled away, sending metal and insulation tumbling into the streets below. Glass rained down on the sidewalks, and the parking lot became a swirling tunnel of flying debris. The storm's roar drowned out shouts and sirens as the tornado pressed deeper into downtown. The tornado's forward speed carried it relentlessly onward, leaving a trail of shattered glass and twisted steel. In just a matter of minutes, Salt Lake City's skyline, a place thought immune to such disasters, was under direct assault. The myth of mountain protection vanished against the raw force of nature as the storm continued its march through the heart of the city. Meteorologists at the National Weather Service watched the skies that day, but nothing on their screens hinted at disaster. The storm that would upend Salt Lake City built itself in silence, hidden by the very geography that was supposed to offer protection. A cold upper-level trough drifted in from Nevada, pressing down over the valley. At the same time, warm southerly winds surged north, carrying moisture from the Great Salt Lake. Where these air masses collided, a narrow convergence zone formed, an invisible fault line running straight across the city. Clouds mushroomed upward over the Oquirrh Mountains, reaching heights of 41,000 feet, but the radar at Promontory Point couldn't see what was happening close to the ground. Its beams skimmed overhead, missing the shallow, rapidly developing rotation that would become the tornado. Vertical wind shear along the jet stream twisted the updraft, but to the forecasters, the radar picture looked unremarkable. Just another summer thunderstorm, nothing more. There was no warning. The storm blew up right over the valley, as one forecaster later explained. The Doppler scans, limited by their refresh rate and by the angle of the beam, simply could not keep up. By the time the funnel touched down in Poplar Grove, the only clues were the sudden hail in Harriman and a sky darkening far too quickly for comfort. The tornado formation was so rapid and so close to downtown that the window for any alert vanished. As one meteorologist later said, nothing abnormal on radar until it was too late. The tornado's path tore through the convention tents north of the Delta Center. Hundreds of vendors scrambled for safety. In a matter of seconds, the steel frame structure collapsed, trapping people beneath twisted metal and canvas. Alan Crandy, a 38-year-old supervisor from Las Vegas, was crushed as he tried to help others escape. It was Salt Lake City's first tornado fatality in more than a century. 49 others suffered injuries at the tent site alone, many pulled out by first responders and fellow vendors, dazed and bleeding. Across the street, the Wyndham Hotel's windows exploded outward, sending a shower of glass onto the sidewalks below. Some who had just fled the tents were struck by falling shards, forced to dodge both debris and wind. Inside the lobby, guests huddled as the storm raged outside, surrounded by broken glass and chaos. The city's sense of invulnerability shattered, with every siren and every name added to the list of the injured. Metal twisted and snapped as the tornado slammed into the conference center construction site. The 200-foot crane, a landmark on North Temple, sheared off and crashed to the ground, scattering steel across the block. Workers ran for cover as scaffolding blew apart, the storm's force overwhelming even the heaviest machinery. Just blocks away, at 1,300 North and 200 West, the tornado tore through the city's power substation. Sparks flew as transformers ruptured, and an orange fireball erupted skyward, lighting up the midday gloom. The explosion cut electricity to thousands in downtown Capitol Hill and the avenues, plunging entire neighborhoods into chaos. Across the city, trees that had stood for generations snapped like matchsticks. On the Capitol grounds, over 90 mature trees fell in minutes. In the avenues, 154 homes lost their roofs, with debris strewn across yards and streets. Memory Grove's 100-year-old memorial trees were reduced to stumps, the sacred grove left bare. Nature still writes its own rules even where science insists it can't. Today, Salt Lake's skyline stands as proof that the improbable can become undeniable in minutes. The next impossible event may strike anywhere. Preparedness starts with accepting that certainty is always an illusion. Stay alert, stay ready,